Dr. Tim Swan will introduce our Moreton Lecture.
Thanks, Bill. As Vice Speaker, it's my privilege to plan the Moreton Lecture, which is an annual feature of our meeting. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to share a brief background on Robert D. Moreton, for whom this lectureship is named. Dr. Moreton was born in Mississippi in 1913. He attended Millsap College in Jackson, Mississippi, and then went on to study medicine at the University of Tennessee, where he earned the degree of MD in 1938. This was followed by radiology training at the Mayo Clinic from 1938 to 1941. His first practice was at the Scott and White Clinic in Temple, Texas, where he remained until 1950. While in Temple, he met Alma, born with the last name Eastland, born in Eastland, Texas, and was a Juilliard graduate violinist. He married her in 1945. He then joined the Bond Group in Fort Worth, Texas, where he practiced until 1965. During this time, he was on the clinical faculty at Southwestern Medical School, and in 1965 he joined the staff at MD Anderson and remained there until 1984. Dr. Moreton made significant contributions to GI radiology. He was active in statewide health issues and was appointed by 6 different governors to significant voluntary positions in the state of Texas. He served for 24 years on the Texas Board of Health, and in 1988, a new building in Austin was named in his honor. He was active in the Texas Radiological Society and was president of the TRS at the time of the 39th annual meeting held in Houston in 1952. He was awarded the TRS Gold Medal in 1974. He also received the Gold Medal of the RSNA in 1973 and the Gold Medal of the ACR in 1992. Dr. Moreton was a board member of the John S. Dunn Research Foundation, which is a large philanthropic group. In 1992, Dr. Moreton passed away at the age of 79 after a very productive career. After his death, the John S. Dunn Research Foundation donated grants to the TRS and to the ACR to underwrite an annual Robert D. and Alma Moreton scholarship, or lectureship rather, For this year's Moreton Lecture, we are pleased to have Jeffrey C. Bauer, PhD, with us this morning. Dr. Bauer is an internationally recognized healthcare futurist and medical economist. He has more than 250 publications on the evolution of healthcare. In his 48-year career, he has been a Fulbright Scholar, a Kellogg Foundation National Fellow, a professor at 2 medical schools, health policy advisor to the governor of Colorado, and vice president for health forecasting and strategy for 2 Fortune 500 companies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeff Bauer to the stage.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for all your help. Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here. I have a soft spot in my heart for radiologists that will become clear in just a moment. I actually have pictorial proof of being in on the ground floor with you. But in the just shy 50 years that I've been in healthcare, I've really specialized in working with organizations like yours to talk about the futures of fill in the blank, in this case, forecasting the futures of radiology. Now, I must admit, I actually have a gimmick the way I usually do this. I come to Washington 4 to 6 times a year to speak to groups exactly like this one, the annual meeting of, again, fill in the blank of the medical specialty or academic health organization. And I truly do have a plan. I always write my speech in advance after reviewing the literature of the particular specialty, calling friends who may be practitioners of that type of medicine. And then I come in the day before and run my trap line, so to speak, of my friends on Capitol Hill. And I've been doing that for probably well over 30 years. And I have an equivalent of several deep throats embedded within the Senate and the House, and until recently actually had people I knew who were in elected office. And I come in and compare my notes with them, and then come the next day to give my presentation on the future of healthcare to the group exactly like those of you sitting in this audience. And as I say, I've been doing it for years, and I'm happy to say I think I've been doing it pretty successfully. Well, yesterday, I broke the tradition. I didn't even bother calling anybody I knew on the Hill. I came to your economics forum, and I feel I spent my time in a much better way. Because truly, and I'm not trying to pander to you, but I truly believe that nobody on the Hill has the slightest idea in the world where things are going. And so I couldn't see wasting my time with them. Rather, I thought it would be exciting to come and hear what you all had to say. And again, it reinforces my particular attraction to diagnostic imaging, radiology as a profession, because of all the medical specialties that I've dealt with, and there are, 37 of them now. And I've probably done something, at least an article in a journal for 20 of them. But of all the specialties I've worked with radiology more than any other. And I can tell you my presentation to you is going to be different, not only because I skipped the trip to the Hill yesterday, but because you truly are a different organization. And yesterday, what I saw in the Economic Forum really made me feel that I'd made the right choice in going a little bit away from my usual presentation on here's where healthcare is going, here are the trends in payment, here are the trends in your underlying science, and therefore you need to make some changes because you're headed here, the future is going there, need a little correction, of course. And so actually, I'm fairly well known, I think, in the other specialties for having an unpleasant message. Probably the most common comment I get in evaluations afterwards is, something what really annoyed us about your presentation, Bauer, is deep down inside you're probably right. People don't like it. Well, I'm here to tell you, you are right. And I hope I won't disappoint you. And I will be writing this up. It'll be in the journal, so you'll have a second chance to go after these ideas. And I'd love to carry on the dialogue because I do care about your fine profession. But I truly, absolutely believe that my purpose in front of you is not to identify the discrepancies between where healthcare is going, because I don't have the slightest idea, and where you're going, where I do have a good idea. It's really to validate what you're doing. So you're getting a very different Jeff Bauer forecast for the future of your profession. Because I'm here to tell you, having looked very carefully at it and having spent more time with you as professionals than any other in 48 years in healthcare, that I think you're going in the right direction, or at least as good a direction as could be cast right now. And I had that validated yesterday. So with that deviation from the slides, let me now do the forecast on the futures of radiology, and I underline the S to indicate that the S is the plurality of futures is not a mistake. There are many, many different not only ways in which you can go, but which you will go, but it's all downhill from here on up. None of them will be easy. So that said, I do have a disclosure. I have one consulting engagement with a Belgian company that is developing software in radiology practice management. I have another disclosure, though, that I want you to know. What happened to my... these are not the slides I turned in this morning. Somebody called up the wrong slides. Is it too late to do that? I took a new slide deck this morning. I can live with this, but I had actually had some humor here. Should I just move on? Where's Trina? Yeah, okay. I will just move on. I actually had a picture I was going to show you yesterday. One of your speakers in the afternoon mentioned magnetic resonance imaging, or nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. And I was going to show you a picture of my 1962 high school science project, where I built a nuclear magnetic resonance spectrometer and gained some notoriety, but that's another story. And I wanted to show you my humongous 400 Gauss magnet. It was probably one of the first applied to imaging ferric compounds in solutions. But that's not going to happen. So I'm going to have to go back to the original version of the slides, which unfortunately has I added about a half dozen slides that are relevant to what I heard yesterday. There we go. There we go. Can I go back? So thank you very much, whoever made that correction. Yeah, there's my other disclosure. Best exhibit in physics for the Colorado. If you And so when MRI finally became a modality that attracted a lot of attention, it happened to be when I was our governor's health policy advisor, and Dick Lamb was just fascinated by it. So he had me go back and resurrect my own knowledge. And I never would have thought that it meant no more radiologists. It was exciting stuff, and you know that. But there's my humongous 400 Gauss magnet that actually worked. So, but now the presentation summary, with apologies for the slight glitch there. But I want to tell you how to look at the future. Since I really don't have any particular particular little gems of wisdom to push you toward doing things differently as you confront not only the future of radiology, but do the neat things you're doing to shape the future of healthcare. But I want to talk to you about what I do. I'll share with you a few trade secrets. I also want to talk to you about the scientific, technological, and economic and political forces that are transforming American healthcare, again, to validate more than to challenge you to be thinking differently. I want to talk about the opportunities that you have to work with diagnostic specialists. And then last but not least, sort of as a theme throughout the entire presentation, is to give you some strategies for surviving and thriving through the innovation and partnerships in the local market, which might be pushing just a little bit what you've been talking about. I also looked up Dr. Moreton's background, wanted to know who I was being asked to honor, and it is indeed a privilege to do that. Tim very nicely represented his accomplishments, and I'll just focus on that last one where he's representing radiology in state and federal health organizations. Very clearly, it brings to my mind what is usually my first content slide: Chicken Little lecturing the barnyard animal, saying, and so extrapolating from the best figures available, we see that current trends, unless dramatically reversed, will inevitably lead to a situation in which the sky will fall. And that is my message for some of your confreres and other specialties who I don't think get it. But I would not for a minute hesitate now about using the word chaos to describe healthcare. And I had to resurrect this slide from speeches I gave more like in the 90s when we weren't sure after the demise of Clinton reform and the Newt Gingrich regime coming to Washington. We had no idea where healthcare was going then at the same time. So I injected a dictionary definition of chaos into my slides, and I haven't used it again until this very presentation, because it truly is chaos down there on the Hill. But I do not take chaos as a sign of impending doom. Now, the definition starts out with, its synonyms: chasm, gulf, abyss, a state of things in which chance, just luck of the draw, random throw of the die is supreme. A state of utter confusion, completely wanting an order, reflected a little bit in yesterday's comments. Nature that is subject to no law. But what I really like is this last part: the confused, unorganized state before the creation of distinctly organized forms. And I've always felt that we in the United States really do embody what Winston Churchill said about us when he came over the year after World War II and taught in Fulton College in Missouri for a year. You might remember in the famous press conference as he returned to England, he said that the curious thing he'd learned about us Americans: we could always be counted on to do the right thing after we'd exhausted all the other possibilities. And I think the good folks, or the folks down on the Hill, are exhausting the other possibilities. And we're going to create some distinctly organized forms. Again, why I am validating ACR for the neat things that I heard yesterday, read in the last 18 months of the journal, which someone from the staff nicely sent to me. But in my other life, I'm an artist. I love to paint. And so I'm always looking for paintings, and you'll see several interspersed in my presentation to make a point in the sense that picture might be worth 1,000 words. And so often the health futurists, my half dozen or so buddies, and we do get together and drink beers and compare notes every once in a while. We're on the same programs, especially here in Washington. But I think most of my competitors in this health futurist business look at the political reforms and will dissect ad nauseum, look more finely focused at what's going on, and say the difference between the Affordable Care Act and the American Health Care Act. I am a very different futurist. I'd rather have you look out there at the exciting stuff, that comet blazing across the sky, and thinking about a new realm of possibilities, and feel that I'm not doing you any disservice whatsoever because of what I heard yesterday and what I've read. Now, being from a long time ago Illinois family and living in Chicago for about another month before I moved to Wisconsin. Where are the Badgers down there? Someone told me Wisconsin had a delegation here. Okay, go Badgers. No. The best way to predict your future is to create it, is often attributed to Abraham Lincoln. And I believe in that. Now, there's another great Abraham Lincoln quote on the web, too. You can't really trust the authenticity of everything you find on the internet. Also, Abraham Lincoln. But I go back to much older wisdom. Confucius is saying, surely we will end up where we're headed if we do not change direction. And I don't know anyone that likes the direction in which we're headed. Everybody of any political persuasion, be they the most conservative or the most liberal people I know, my people on both sides down on the Hill, really are concerned about where we're going, albeit for very different reasons. But what excites me and really makes me feel that you are headed somewhere beneficially is the fact that healthcare is going to change, and we will organize that. And you've already set out good blueprints for doing it. And having been in healthcare in the 48 years since I took my first job after graduating from college, which, by the way, since radiation oncologists are here, my very first job for 2 years after I graduated from college was to be Juan A. Del Regato's clinical photographer. And for those of you who are radiation oncologists, you will recognize the name of Dr. Regato. So I got in on the ground floor of the specialty of some of you in this audience. But in the 48 years I've been around, I've seen healthcare change a lot, and I think we have seen nothing in the past compared to what we're going to see between now and about 2021, 22. Politically, economically, socially, scientifically, the incredible changes in science that are taking place. So with this kind of uncertainty, how can you as radiologists and leaders in your own state organizations prepare for uncertainty when the change is unprecedented? We can't go back to the history books, I'm saying, and figure out, how did we do this when the Clintons were evaluating health reform in 93, or when Bush made his efforts in 2004 leading to Medicare Part D and all that? Well, there are many answers. We read the trade journals. I read the bulletin. Someone from staff kindly sent me the last year and a half and read the bulletin. JACR, you got great documents going there. Read Modern Healthcare, the health reports in the New England Journal, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, what have you. You can see what others are doing, and you do that very beneficially by attending professional meetings like this one. You can follow the Affordable Care Act in MACRA. I only disagreed with two things yesterday that were being said, and one of them, and I'll get to the second one in a moment, the other is MACRA. I thought MACRA meant making accounts received awful. Making accounts collected really awful, something like that. And that will really reinforce a point I'm going to make about where the money is or isn't coming from. Also, to look at the future, though, you can make predictions, and that's what I'm often asked to do, and my fellow friendly competitors. And you can make forecasts. Now, do I have any former students in the audience? For the 18 years, I've had a few students I know went into radiology. Okay, I guess not. Well, anybody that had been a former student of mine at either Wisconsin or Colorado would know. I was legion for this. I telegraphed my final exam questions. Throughout the semester, I would have a few slides that had 2 words in red on them. And those 2 words in red were the final exam. You could just expect it. Compare and contrast, in this case, predicting and forecasting, and explain how you would operationalize them to make a difference in your clinical research or in your medical practice or whatever you're doing. So I'm here to tell you that forecasting and predicting are not synonyms. They mean something very different, and you're there to say, well, that's pretty ridiculous. They're used as synonyms all the time. Don't they mean exactly the same thing? Well, I think it is the simplicity of that erroneous thinking, no discredit to you because it's so common, that really leads us to look incorrectly at the future. So bear with me for just a few moments as I try to get you to think about shifting from predicting the future of healthcare to forecasting it, which is what you're doing, and again, consistent with my validation of the ACR's vision into its own crystal ball, that makes me so comfortable to be here today. But textbook definition of predicting, you could get it out of virtually any quantitative analysis book that you may have used in graduate school or could go find at a university bookstore today. It's a specific estimate of the expected value of a key variable at a future point in time. So it's how many CT scans are going to be ordered next year. It's how many radiology techs we will be short in 2020 if certain technologies take off. It's how much healthcare spending will be, a figure that was addressed from a couple of different perspectives in yesterday's economic forum. But it's taking a specific thing we care about and saying a couple of years from now, what will that value be? Sort of in the sense of Wayne Gretzky telling us to find out where the puck is going to be so that we can skate to it. Well, there's a science behind predicting. With a PhD in medical economics, I'm probably as well trained as about anybody in it, and quite a few of you in this audience, especially the radiation physicists, would be very, very well trained in this too. Probably better than I am, actually. But to make a prediction, to say what will happen when this set of events occurs simultaneously, you begin by finding the independent variables that explained the dependent variable in the past. So if you're looking for how much money was spent on healthcare, what explained it in the past? And it's things like politics and insurance systems and other things that were nicely characterized yesterday. Then you collect the historical data on the variable. How much was spent in the past for healthcare as a percent of gross domestic product or per capita spending, and how much was spent through government programs, Medicare and Medicaid, and how much was spent on imaging modalities. And you go out and you get these massive databases, and then you look at the databases to find the best mathematical fit. And I bet every one of you, in the very least in your residency days, did something like a linear regression analysis or an exponential smoothing technique. Sound familiar to all of you? Okay, well, that's what you did. To become a good member, a good practitioner of the predictive sciences, you learn how to find the mathematical equation that best explains the relationship in the past, and then you extrapolate that out into the future. So the prediction really becomes from just saying, all right, we're here in 2017, and we got all these numbers up through 2017. If we continue that equation out there, where does it cross the vertical axis? And that tells us things. So the interesting story in terms of healthcare, and really leading to the only other place where I disagree with what I heard yesterday, and we'll get to that, is that when Barack Obama was presidential candidate back in 2008, in case you don't remember this, he ran against healthcare reform. Remember, he had to fight Hillary Clinton in the primaries, and she was gung-ho to go out and change the U.S. healthcare delivery system. And Barack Obama said, no, we have far more important problems in this country to solve than the healthcare delivery system. So Barack Obama becomes inaugurated as president in 2009 with no expectation that he would become a health reformer the following year in Congress, and probably, arguably, leave the Affordable Care Act as his only major legislative accomplishment. Well, why did he make that sudden shift from candidate opposed to health reform to someone who put all of his real first 2 years in office into health reform? It's because a couple of economists, Peter Orszag in particular, that transferred from the Congressional Budget Office to the Office of Management and Budget, also in January 2009, wrote an article that said, healthcare spending is going to go up to 20% of gross domestic product by 2015. So in 2009, January of that year, the Social Security Bulletin publishes an article. Barack Obama enters the White House, is given this article by one of the co-authors, and it says healthcare is going to 20% of GDP by 2015, which will hopefully be, the third year of your second term, and there's no money. As two speakers eloquently said yesterday in the economics forum, if healthcare is going to gobble up 3% more of actually 4% more, because it was only 16% at the time, you're not going to have any money to do the other things that you ran for as a candidate. So Barack Obama is convinced by several people that he needs to really begin focusing on managing that healthcare curve and make sure it doesn't go above 20%. Remember, he wanted to stop the health curve to try and tame it, to prevent it from going any further, so that there would then, in the second term, be money for doing other things. Well, the prediction by people with fancy degrees from big Eastern and West Coast universities was that healthcare would be 20% of GDP, by when? 2015. What was the actual number? 17.3%. So they were off by almost 300 basis points, 270 basis points. That is a pretty whopping error. Well, it also turns out, in fact, I was going to put this in the presentation and just plumb forgot. One of your members wrote an article toward the end of last year in the JACR and evaluated those figures and showed how wrong the predictions had always been. So the 20% prediction, the 17% accomplishment, something wasn't there. Well, why did the prediction miss? It becomes critical to my validation, my support for what you're doing to become involved with the patients. In other words, I'm now telegraphing you my final conclusion in the presentation when I finish a little after 9 o'clock. I'm going to be talking about a little bit about the importance of what you're doing to integrate with patients. It's because the expectation by the same economists that said it would be 20%, or their cohorts, was that if Obama would simply hold off on health reform and not make the mandate required until 2014, then there'd be plenty of money, because we're having this terrible recession from 2008, and Americans didn't have any money. In fact, by 2009, 2010, they had considerably less money than they'd had in 2008. But the economists said it'll be back on track by 2014, so make the mandate in 2014. Well, here's what actually happened in 2014. The CBO projections, the top line, if things hadn't changed, there was no financial crisis. And what was actually there was healthcare still below the 2008 level. So that's why every year in its last issue, the Wall Street Journal publishes an article that we economists take like an arrow in the heart. It points out that at the beginning of the year, they survey economists, and I expect most of you read the Wall Street Journal at least a little bit, so you know that article I'm talking. It always includes this graphic. This graphic is in it every year just to draw our attention to it, us economists. And at the beginning of the year, they ask a bunch of economists about what's the interest rate going to be at the end of the year, what's the unemployment rate going to be, what's the government deficit going to be, and economists fall into the trap of giving it to it. And then the Wall Street Journal just has some of its editors throw darts at a dartboard, and every year the dartboard wins. Who knows I'm not making that up? I mean, here's just one of the recent examples. So we're not very good. So the science of predicting that I, as a PhD medical economist, you would expect to be used to tell you what are the futures of radiology really isn't good. You can make good predictions. If nothing were changing, if the quantifiable relationships between the demand for radiological services were going to work in the future the way it has worked in the past, I would be giving you my best predictions. And I would proudly be standing at 99% confidence level telling you what your demand was going to be a couple of years from now. Assuming good data and good methodological practice, I could do that if nothing were going to change. But I think you already all agreed with me that we're going to see dramatic change. So what we've got is an unpredictability in dynamic systems because the way things are going to work in the future isn't the way they work in the past. Anybody bothered by that? Is there anybody saying, why did Tim and his people choose this guy because he doesn't know what he's talking about? We got stability here? I don't think so. And the reason I feel comfortable saying that is because I sat in on your sessions yesterday. So healthcare, the rapidly changing medical marketplace, is truly unpredictable. I would be shamming you. I would be absolutely pulling the wool over your eyes if I were to sit here and tell you, here's where it's going to go. Gets to my disagreement with the one thing I heard yesterday that I think we need to reevaluate. But how can you as a profession, you as individual imaging specialists, prepare for the future if it's unpredictable? In other words, you have no idea where it's going. I started out by saying I didn't even want to waste my time going down there yesterday because they don't know either. So what do? Well, there's the art of forecasting. Now, predictive science is appropriately called a science. Nothing changes. It's that lockstep. But forecasting is something different. Now, when I throw out the word forecasting, what do you think? What's it make you think of? Weather, exactly, thank you. Well, I'm going to let you in on a little secret because you're probably saying, well, the guy's already established his credentials with a PhD in economics. With some trepidation, I will tell you that I was a weatherman first. Okay? My original training, my job with Dr. Del Regato was a total fluke. When I graduated from college back in the late 60s, I fully expected to go back to what was my original training, which was atmospheric physics, research meteorology. In fact, just to show you what a real nerd I am, my very first published scientific paper is in the November 1967 issue of the Journal of Atmospheric Physics. And its title is Comments on the Ground Observation of the Formation of Hailstones in Cumulonimbus Clouds. Okay? So I know something about the art of forecasting because to be able to write an article in a refereed physics journal, I had to know something about talking about the things that might happen given the juxtaposition of certain atmospheric events. Well, a forecast is not a point estimate of some future value. It's an estimate of the probabilities of possibilities for a key variable. In other words, when several different things could happen, then you need a forecast. And it's a totally different methodology. And it's well reflected by the words of a physicist who I even knew when I was, a nerd between my nuclear magnetic resonance spectrometer and my Hale days, pretty much which encompassed the 60s. Freeman Dyson was already a famous scientist at Princeton. And when he turned 90 a few years back, the New York Times Sunday magazine wrote an article about him. And I love this. I don't think of myself predicting things. I'm expressing possibilities, things that could happen. To a large extent, it's a question of how badly people want them to happen. The purpose of thinking about the future is not to predict it, but to raise people's hopes. Hats off to ACR for what I heard yesterday at the Economics Forum. Coming up with better ideas, giving people data, participating, showing that you're part of the team to find a solution. That's what forecasting is to me. You're not predicting things. So here's what we're going to be, and we're going to fight to the death to get there. It's what can we imagine? What's in the realm of the possible? So forecasting begins just like predicting. Weather forecasting begins with an understanding of the weather, the relative humidity, the temperature, the atmospheric pressure, and the wind. You tell any research meteorologist or weatherman, weatherwoman, those four things, and he or she is going to give you the range of possibilities for the weather because he or she will go to their databases, and we have extensive weather databases, very good ones dating back to the 1860s, interestingly enough, throughout much of the United States. And then they're going to look at the different outcomes. So I guarantee you that somebody woke up at a TV station here in Washington this morning to do the afternoon forecast. And what they did, they didn't go back and look at the data and find the mathematical equation that said something about this afternoon's weather. Rather, they got up at 6 o'clock this morning and they looked at their instruments and they looked at the relative humidity, the water, the temperature, the pressure, the wind, and then they went back and they simply asked the computer, find the last 100 days that started out just like today, same values of those 4 variables, and tell me what happened at noon. And if on 30 of those 100 days it rained, there's your 30% chance of rain. Everybody with me? Huh? You thought this was rocket science. Man, it's 5th grade, not even calculus. I don't know. I haven't been in 5th grade for so long. I really enjoyed 5th grade, though, all 3 times. But so what we need to do is to look at the realm of possibilities and figure out how in the heck we get there. So the skill of a forecaster, really what I formalized when Dick Lamb and I had a lot of discussions back in the 80s, is the governor telling me, Jeff, you really need to spend more time looking at possibilities. And hats off to you for having done it. That's why I say, I'm really sorry if I'm disappointing you that I'm not going to tell you, lay off on this one, ACR, because that's going in the wrong direction. No, I'm going to conclude with keep on keeping on, because you get it, but you're looking at possibilities and you can go out and create them in the sense that I, with my physics background, thinks what will get us in a better place than anywhere else. And now the other thing is to expect the different outcomes simultaneously. Well, let me give you my forecast for medical spending. And here's my one big disagreement. Not that any of your members were wrong. Your members accurately corrected the numbers that are being given out by the government economists and the other people. But you might remember Simmons said that medical spending would go up. They're back on their 20% number again by 2022. Well, I think that's exactly wrong. I think the chances of healthcare spending growing are less than 10%. In other words, I really believe, and you'll see my second number, that 50% right now, looking from 2017, 5 years forward, that stagnation is the best of all possible worlds, and we're actually going to see a decline in spending almost equally. And I must tell you, I just changed this slide. The numbers were a little bit different until about 2 months ago. And then as I tried to understand what was going on in the Hill and dragged out my chaos slide, I made the chance of decline even a little higher. And I think that we're going to look at 2016, maybe 2017, as the best healthcare spending we ever had. And it's either the same or all downhill from here. And I'm going to back that up with data in just a moment. Now, what does that mean for healthcare enterprises? For you with radiology groups, you who perhaps work in hospital administrations or have jobs as executives responsible for a larger array of clinical services or something like that. Whether you're in radiology or selling diagnostic imaging devices or running a hospital or selling health insurance, it doesn't matter. If you're taking part of that 17% of GDP that we're spending today, I think the chances are 25% that within 5 years you will cease to exist. And that's because I see so many people doing the wrong things. The organizations that get my sort of not so thinly veiled, I think you're trying to protect a past that has no future, do things differently. Clearly not the message for ACR. I think that 40% are going to continue to work as organized precariously, and they will make payroll, show up every week, 5 years from now, still exist with the same letterhead, won't have had to spend a lot of money on lawyers to fight off bankruptcy or the like. But 35%, the remaining residual, is going to thrive by fixing the way care is delivered. And again, that's why I'm validating you. The worst case scenario that I see embedded in anything I saw in the last 18 months of your journal or heard in yesterday's economics forum is they will continue as organized. But the exciting part came from your positioning to be in the 35% that want to reinvent the way healthcare is delivered by becoming deeply involved in the care plans and other things that will be embedded in my final couple of slides. Now that said, and again leaving you with an optimistic view, how do you interpret a forecast if I've given you these numbers and they are sort of daunting? Well, first of all, any good forecaster says allow for unexpected, unprecedented outcomes. Most of you probably have heard of Nicholas Taleb's concept of the black swan. Black swans exist, but they're not very common. I want to encourage you to think about green swans. I would like, and I think I see it underneath a lot of your plans, something that never existed before. Let's go out and create it because it makes sense in the context, the changes, especially the economic changes I'm going to talk about. And then the GOK factor. When I worked for Dr. Del Regato, it was in a Catholic hospital run by a nun named Sister Myra James. And Sister Myra James, for some reason, loved to hear me talk about weather forecasting. And so she convinced me that every forecast had to have a GOK, a God only knows factor. And Sister Myra James, in fact, said, Jeff, the GOK factor is 10%. Don't you forget that. So then you have to demand objectivity. You can't get into wish casting. I can guarantee you many a weekend when I was back in the forecasting days, and I was a golfer. I'm a recovering golfer now, but I was a real golfer back then. And I I wanted a nice weekend for golf, so there was the temptation to say 60% chance of sunny skies when I knew it was most likely going to rain. Well, you can't have that wish casting. You have to make your thoughts objectively. And I think one of the biggest problems with most of the health futurists, my friendly competitors, is their political persuasion shows through in what they say is going to happen, because they can't quite detach themselves from what they see or would like. And the longer you look forward, the less you're confident in what your forecast is. But the most exciting part, and again, something I want to make a part of my theme for ACR as you take this forward to making the changes in your states, in your marketplaces, in your practice, is to accept the likelihood of several outcomes simultaneously. Because any weather forecaster knows that for a weather forecast area, which could be 100 miles by 100 miles, if you predict 50% chance of rain, and it rains in half of the forecast area and doesn't rain in the other half, it's a perfect forecast. So you learn to live with ambiguities like that of being right by being half wrong. Does it make sense? If you need further wisdom, back to the Oriental thinkers, things are not as they seem, nor are they otherwise. This will help you become a better forecaster. But what I want to stress for imaging, leading up to my bottom line conclusion for you, is that one size fits all is absolutely the wrong way to do forecasting. And yet predictive science does come up with one single answer at a specified level of confidence. But rather, healthcare is inherently local. I heard that when I started in healthcare back in the late 60s, and I believe it to this core. Local areas are remarkably diverse. The Chicago area where I live has a very different healthcare marketplace than, say, the San Francisco market area where I'm doing a fair amount of consulting right now for a tech company in a totally different field that has nothing to do with imaging. And you all know that urban and rural are different. Mississippi and Montana are different. And therefore, radiology in one market is not going to be the same as radiology in a different market. Again, you need the freedom within the general context of ACR's ideas to do what's going to work in your marketplace, and I haven't heard anything to get in the way of doing that. Because radiologists in one practice are not necessarily going to be the radiologists in the other, but you're developing a beautiful guideline, a great set of processes to do this. But the other thing I want to mention, to go back to the bottom line on the art of forecasting slide a moment ago, to lead into a quick overview of the trends, and then I'll give you a couple of conclusions and be done, and we'll pause for Q&A and discussion and the like, is that whenever the climate changes, a good weather atmospheric physicist, meteorologist knows that you have to change your forecasting technique. Now, I'm not going to take you on a lengthy, I'm not going to take you in any way whatsoever into my views on climate change, but I still follow it quite carefully. But I can tell you, independent of what my views might be, that all meteorologists are trained to say, if the climate changes, you have to change what you're doing. Climate, to put it in the terms you'd learn in a meteorology program, climate is what you expect, weather is what you get. So climate in Chicago, where I live for the time being, has a certain expectation. Okay, but it's changed a lot. The weather that I've experienced in the 13 years I've now lived in Chicago is very different than the weather I knew visiting Chicago a lot when I lived in Colorado the years before that and used to visit. So what you expect versus what you get are the two totally different are the differences between climate and change. And what we should expect is very different in a chaotic environment where things can go in any different direction, where there's no political leadership, where the economics of practice is being turned upside down, where science is changing and everything. So we're seeing climate change, and I'm going to real quickly walk you through what I think are the 4 dimensions of climate change that help validate again the changes that are possible given the blueprints you're getting from ACR. I won't read these right now because I'll get to each of them. But we're having a revolution in biological sciences. And when I look at the rest of the program, the sessions that you're seeing on molecular medicine and precision medicine and the like, you as imaging specialists clearly get it. But we're moving from this whole idea of acute care, finding the diagnostic that explains which organ is to be removed, or finding the underlying morphological artifact that shows why this kidney function isn't performing as expected, what have you. We're moving from this one-size-fits-all, the Ant Mini, oh, this is what it is, and everything looks like that, is this, to the idea of precision medicine, where we realize based on personalized differences, genetics, epigenetics, environment, diet, change, patients' preferences, and the like, what might look the same on an image is not necessarily even the same disease process, and certainly might lead to a different diagnosis based on several considerations which were eloquently made by yesterday's speakers at the Economics Forum. So this whole idea of precision medicine means getting involved with the patient. And by extension, the population is made up of all those patients. So if we are moving quickly away from everybody gets the same diagnosis, like put in an acute care hospital and we either give the drug that eliminates that pathology or go to the surgeon that takes it out, all of a sudden we're now looking at all of these differences, which I don't need to elaborate to you because I heard it done beautifully yesterday and saw it in your journals and in the bulletin, to really focus then on what can we do to optimize the health of the population. And that means we need to manage the patient's disease to prevent the need for acute care. And again, I can go to a lot of other professional associations and have to make that point because it's sort of new to them. I can just gloss over it right now because you get it. It's so deeply embedded in what I've seen in your stuff as you move from imaging 2.0 to imaging 3.0. Now, cost-effective care, this whole idea of spending the least possible money to get the desired outcomes, which we've already posited will be variable in this highly complex world, is going to achieve by matching therapies to each patient's specific disease characteristics, epigenetics, environment, behavior, physical activity, nutrition, stress, other things that you understand, and recognize your potential role to lead others to understand within the reallocation of healthcare resources. And then last but not least, the patient-centered care teams, physicians, including radiologists. You're not the doctor's doctor anymore, you're the system's doctor, working alongside nurses, pharmacists, therapists, etc., are going to anchor the best practice models. That's really the key. So this whole revolution as we move from acute care, let's find out what it is and cut it out or give a drug to dissolve it, is now moving to, we're just going to manage diseases, an awful lot of things, oncology being a good case in point. We don't expect the cure, we just want to manage it, and we can lead the patient to a much better life, spending far less, etc. Again, you get it, so I don't have to elaborate. The second set of trends that gives me very excited about validating what you're doing is the whole informations and communications technology issue. When I wrote a book along with Dr. Mark Ringel back in the late 90s, came out in 99, called Telemedicine and the Reinvention of Healthcare. Mark, who is a family practice physician by background and also an NPR health reporter at the time, Mark and I really said, what do you think data sciences are going to transform healthcare? So we started delving into it, and it was very clear in the late 90s as we were doing the research that imaging sciences were ahead of everybody else. Teleradiology actually became our metaphor for defining what would become the foundations of most other medical specialties. And so again, you were in on the ground floor envisioning something a little different, quite unprecedented and the like, and changing your production processes, changing the sites of care, making sure that a specialist could be called in from Australia if need be, or you could cover a rural area. Again, I'm wasting your time to talk about that because you're the ones who did it, and thank you for giving us good material for a good book. But again, that information and communications technology transforming care, keep it up because you've already proven that you're the foundation of doing it. And these robust information and communication technology networks are going to be the foundation of good medical practice. Hotspotting, two of the speakers yesterday in the Economic Forum talked about how they were using risk systems to get the information on who are the patients that were demanding the most tests, who were the patients that needed to be followed and worked with in the context of, in one case it was internal medicine, in another case it was nephrology. This disease management is all about it, and you are at the core. You've got the technology mastered better than anyone else. Other professions should be looking to you if they aren't already. Then the integration into the electronic health record for efficient and production medical services. You were there yesterday, you don't need to hear me elaborate that. And then the virtual technologies, not only telemedicine, but robotics, artificial intelligence. Again, I shouldn't waste your time saying anything because you had such an excellent presentation yesterday. And to hear about your Data Imaging Sciences Institute really energized me. I'm going to be paying with you even more, paying more attention to you. So this is what's going to replace hands-on care. Take care of patients where they are, which is not necessarily sitting in an exam room facing a clinician. Now, the end of growth in health spending, this is where I want to put a little bit more emphasis to let you know my disagreement on that healthcare is spending of GDP. Because the premise yesterday embedded in a couple of the slides, again, accurate, totally accurate representation of what fellow economists like me are saying, is that healthcare is going to be 20% of GDP. Well, that's an accurate representation of the wrong number, in my opinion. Here's why, real quickly. Because governments and employers who pay 80% of all the healthcare bills, and historically since the early 70s, it's been almost high 40s government, high 30s private industry, switched a little more to now about 50-30. But governments and employers pay the vast majority of our healthcare expenditures, and both of them have hit the limits of what they're willing and able to spend. Do any of you, since you're organized by states, come from a state that wants to spend more on healthcare next year? Governor ran for office, state legislature guys, we can hardly wait to get out there and spend more money on healthcare. No. And when you look at the fiasco that's about to happen down here on the Hill on Medicaid, based on the stories I read yesterday on the newest presidential budget, we're going to see budget cuts proposed. I don't think that personally don't think they're going to happen. We'll see. But we're going to see proposed budget cuts the likes of which we've never seen before. So government, I just take it as given. Its 50% is peaked, okay, and probably declining. Employers feel the same way. I give 4 or 5 speeches a year to employer groups, and I don't go to any employer group helping them figure out how to increase their spending on healthcare. I wouldn't even be invited to speak to those groups unless I came talking about how to help them spend less on healthcare, or at least get a better deal for the money they are spending right now. They are expecting providers, and that's not just you, it's all physicians, and it's increasingly nurses and pharmacists and the like, to be accountable for providing care. The at-risk stuff, the volume to value that was, again, so nicely characterized yesterday, which is why I can skip over it, because you get it. The demand is going to change significantly. Once we change consumer behavior, and patients are expected to pay an increasing portion of their care, you're going to see totally different expectations, again, reinforcing your professional college's position that you need to get out there and start talking to the patient. And it was really cool yesterday to hear some of the concepts of getting involved with the patient to make it clear that you earned your money. Because believe me, I've spent many hours involved in studies of radiologists' bills to patients. And the patient is always, this sort of resenting. They never met you. What, you're getting charged this for somebody I never met? Are you sure there was a real doctor involved in this? You know the story. Well, now you can be that real doctor in making the system come out much better. But the real key, and I'm going to spend about 2 minutes on this just so you'll see my numbers and see why I disagree so vehemently with the government predictions that you saw yesterday, is that patients don't have any more disposable income. And I would say that I'm now in the consensus of economists. 3 or 4 years ago, there was a minority, a strong minority, 20 to 30% of all economists who felt what I'm about to describe. But today I'd say it's the majority. In fact, if I'd been thinking about it, there was an excellent article in the Sunday business section of the New York Times that polled economists on this. And it's the fact that income growth in the United States is probably over. This idea of any politician, and again, I'm not being political here and speaking against Trump or against whoever, Democrats, Republicans, doesn't matter. The consensus in the economics profession is that growth in the 3 to 4% that the politicians are promising isn't possible. In fact, again, yesterday's New York Times had a great article about the fact we don't even have the skilled labor to do it. The estimate yesterday in the New York Times is about a 2% absolute peak on growth in the economy because we don't have the workforce to do the kinds of things that presumably will be done if the people in Congress should appropriate more money for infrastructure. We simply can't do it. The resources aren't there. So this forces us to think of things differently. And again, when you look at the rather rapid rise in how much money people have been expected to contribute to their care, and the gray line on the bottom is that portion, again, I can be quick because several other people addressed this yesterday, but that gray line shows the patients paying less for their health care, more for their health care, more and more, at a time they don't have it. And interestingly enough, flying in here from Chicago on yesterday morning, I sat next to a consultant from Huron Consultants, and he saw me reading ACR actually and asked if I were in healthcare. And so I said yes. And that's what he did. And he said, I do accounts receivable management for Huron Consulting. And I said, how business? He says, booming, because there's so darn many accounts receivable. We can't get the money to come in. Well, that's because the money isn't there. The money is now increasingly the obligation of the patient, and they don't have it. Now, why don't they have it? Well, first of all, we had the 2008 recession. Well, that really sapped the economy. Again, you are well familiar with the figures. But you also now can read that the stock market, Dow Jones, Standard & Poor, you name it, has hit all-time records. Wealth has recovered. Pension benefits are back up far above where they were in 2008 to 2010 when they dropped to abysmally and scary levels. Okay, so you know that presumably the economy's turned around. But not to be forgotten, and this interestingly enough was the common bond between both Donald Trump and originally Bernie Sanders, is that 102% of the economic gains between 2008 and 2016, 102% of that went to the upper 10% of income. In other words, 90% of the American population to this day has less money than it did in 2008. And these are the people to whom we are now turning to pay a larger portion of the bills. And they're wondering, who is that radiologist? Did I really get that from my nephrologist and the like? So it's a very scary thing. And when you look for inflation-adjusted income, the red line, it's even worse. So again, nicely characterized by your speakers yesterday, the money isn't there. The productive resources to return to this great growth of the past in healthcare. I'm in a majority of economists now that has no idea in the world how we're going to get back there. We have to learn to live with less. And to the extent that the Affordable Care Act, again, nicely and quite correctly characterized by a couple of yesterday's speakers, the premise behind the Affordable Care Act was that, well, we'll get the people under 35 to pay for it. Well, the red on all three of these graphs, I don't want to take the time to bore you with the graph, but shows that still the most hammered, the most disadvantaged portion of the American population is the people in the 26 to 35 age group. They don't have the money, and that's where the safety valve was. So the point is healthcare. This is the real trend of health spending. It's moving towards zero growth, and that's why, sadly, I feel comfortable in my forecast that there's a 10% chance at best of healthcare continuing to grow, 50% chance it'll stabilize, and a 40% chance it's going down. So I'm 90% confident here as a weather forecaster and a medical economist to tell you that you better keep doing what you're doing as ACR, which I saw based on the premises of no additional money coming in. You know you have to do better with what we've got, and that makes you leaders. Because, let's go back to the bottom line on the slide from a few slides ago, patients won't have disposable money to pay more for care. So the real key is, without more money, is helping manage the patient encounters so that we eliminate the care that the patients do not need and cannot afford. And I've been using this slide in every single presentation to every single professional group for about 2 years now. Okay? And I'm leading up to making you feel real good here. I'm going to show you why in just a second. Because before I'd read any of your JACRs or bulletins from the last year and a half, this was Jeff Bauer's text. And then I extended that to say that eliminating care that patients do not need and cannot afford will be the key to financial survival in a no-growth market. Okay? And what it means, and this to me is what the real three-legged stool is, or the triple aim, is clinical management, which becomes expense management, which becomes performance improvement. Constrained optimization is the economist's way or the engineer's way of saying no more money. So I have, of my own volition and training and what I see in my own crystal ball, come to the idea that the real key to success in medical practice is to focus on preventing people from being asked to spend on things that they don't need and can't afford. Okay? Now, does that sound like anything you've seen? Sure. If you just read the general medical press, this is now a couple months old, but just in 1 week to show an audience how much I saw the spirit now permeating the outlook of people that decide what healthcare spending is going to be. There's a 10-year study of early stage prostate cancer issues, how much money we spend on drugs for conditions where they have no proven clinical benefit, how much money we spend on general anesthesia for colonoscopies when there's no benefit whatsoever to that for a large number of patients, how much money we spend on expensive new antipsychotic medications when the old ones actually have better clinical trials and the like. So what I've done, and I'm now with your permission going to do this, is I'm going to add ACR to my list of 3 organizations that I actually have worked with over the last couple of years to help them with what is effectively the Choosing Wisely campaign. Because that's consistent with my vision, and I believe by extension your vision, of what the triple aim really is. The triple aim is preventing those expenditures on things that don't make the patient better off that they can't afford. And American College of Physicians, with now 13 other specialty colleges, has done a wonderful job doing that. You should look up Choosing Wisely if you haven't, but you're doing it too, so in no way am I saying that radiologists are behind. ACS has done some neat things, the Academy of Dermatology has. So I hope it's okay if I now add a 4th slide as I run this around the country, because ACR with radiology has done it with Imaging 3.0. You have. No, I'm the one, I'm the one that should be lauding you. So is it okay? I would expect someone, Tim, you'll make sure someone sends me a letter that if I'm not authorized, I'm going to deem authorization here if that's okay, to include you on the slide, because Imaging 3.0 is at least as good as what the internists are doing and the dermatologists are doing. And you deserve the credit for it, so I'm using this as my opportunity to add it here. But what did I just read you, my triple slide? It's almost exactly what jumps off the page on your Imaging 3.0. Deliver all the imaging care that is beneficial and necessary and none that is not. We've been saying the same thing for the last couple of years. So I would be a fool to stand before you today and use my last 7 minutes telling you what you ought to be doing, as I would tell several other professional associations what they ought to do, because they're not getting it, you're getting it. And so as much as here, I'm here to tip my hat to you. The value chain, pay attention to this. I don't have anything to add. You have accomplished with Imaging 3.0 what you need to be doing. So you need now to take that seriously. The point of my message is not, boy, ACR, you better get your act together and start moving in some new directions. It's focus on what you've already done because it's so darn progressive and so darn good. And this ended up a little bit fuzzy, but you've gone to the proper depth. Again, I might, in front of another audience, use ACR work here. But I love this. So the spirit in which I want to leave this and move into my few concluding slides is the cartoon that you have at the end. I didn't ask for permission for this because you've got it online, but I just love this. Oh, crap, was that today? How many of you remember this? This is, you've got this out there. We're supposed to be doing these things, right? You don't want to miss the boat. So keep on keeping on is my real message to you. Now, I'm going to look in my crystal ball and do one thing. Since I've already told you I don't have any particularly stunning insight to tell you what things you've missed as I go down to the hill and have them telling me what's going to happen and see what you're doing. You're doing fine. But I'm going to make a forecast looking in my crystal ball at a pretty high level of confidence and what I call diagnostic convergence. So if any of you have got a better term for it, I would appreciate it. And if I'm close to something someone else has been working on, I would be happy to get on board. But it's embedded again in one of the articles that I found in JACR. Dr. David Hayes. Dr. Hayes here by any chance? I don't know Dr. Hayes, but he started out an article, just jumped right off the page at me. I get x-rays, EKG tests, echoes, blood tests. Are they needed? I doubt it, but no one discusses that with me or mentions the cost. Why would they? Government insurance will pay for it. Attended your forum yesterday. Again, I need say nothing because you get it. And so his excellent article about the affordable care, the basic economics, the customer impact, reinforces what you're all about. And so what I think is coming is that next step. If there's something beyond Imaging 3.0, Imaging 4.0 might almost be better called Diagnostic Convergence, what have you. But I'm defining it as research-driven integration with lab medicine. And I don't mean just the pathologist medicine. I mean the cath lab with the cardiologists and the GI lab with the gastroenterologists. Anybody that's got a lab that's doing something, that's doing some diagnostics, you need to be working with them to take the bigger picture of all diagnostics, the tests of a broader range that Dr. Hayes included in his art, and focus on eliminating the overlap between radiology and pathology. If you really want to be responsible in the history books that are written about 2040 for the successes in the healthcare delivery system, if you want imaging to be seen as the true leader, then I think you are better positioned than any other specialty college, if there's anything to my forecast here. So call it diagnostic convergence, whatever you want. But it's to find that most cost-effective test and then sequencing these across all of diagnostics. And especially as lab medicine and several of these other labs converge on molecular level biological instructions, not just morphology or chemistry, you've got an interesting challenge there. So that's my big hope for you. And then we've got government-driven, as I just moved to my last couple of slides, I want to point out that polarized politics within and between the parties. And it's not just Republicans versus Democrats. It's Democrats versus Democrats and Republicans versus Democrats and Republicans versus Republicans, excuse me. We're not going to see any enduring national reforms. I really just cannot see anything good happening nationally. And totally concur with yesterday's speaker, whose last slide said health reform is coming to your state. That leads to some really exciting challenges. I would also add, though, a little cynicism towards what we hear often when people say, we've got, the MIPS coming in and all these other things under MACRA, that the existing laws are very unlikely to be implemented and enforced. You have to do it. I would never stand before a large national organization and say, you can just ignore MACRA, for example, because it's not going to happen. I'm real comfortable in telling you it's not going to happen, but in the slight chance I'm wrong, the 10% I'm wrong, you don't want to be on the outside if I am. So ACR has to keep doing all the neat things that it's doing to deal with that, but at the same time, don't expect them to play out in the market near you. And then the existing regulations, I say, are unlikely to be enforced or it's promulgated. And the CMS has struggled to manage its demonstration and pilot projects, hasn't done very well in that regard either. So what's going to happen is the state level thing, the state level change as Washington fails abysmally and continues to lead us with so much uncertainty. So what you really have to do to bring all this to a close just in my last 2 minutes is redirect reform, reinvent the way healthcare is delivered. And that's not a harangue to you. I'm wasting your time if I suggest you haven't been doing it, because you have not only reinvented imaging, moving from imaging 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0, but you now see your role of being a part of the big picture. So you have to become efficient, Several speakers said this eloquently yesterday. Getting the waste out of the system. You need to become effective. Giving people a service at the level at which they expected, so there aren't any surprises saying, oh, that was a shoddy product. Why did I get that misdiagnosis? Or why was that diagnosis missed by the referring physician? No unexplained variation. And we have to do it. Don Berwick's numbers, although Don is known for his quality stuff, it's his studies of poor quality that impress me the most. And Don and his colleagues at IHI have done several studies of their refereed, peer-reviewed literature, and they show that the midpoint for waste in healthcare delivery is 34%, ranges from a low of 21 to a high of 47 in about 65 studies that they reviewed in this JAMA article. So what it really boils down to, my last pictorial slides here, is that healthcare is an SUV. And and I stand guilty. I've owned both an Expedition and a Suburban in my life. So, but it's this big behemoth that's much larger than what we need. It's very expensive. It costs a lot of money to insure it. It has a terrible safety record. It's expensive to park. So your image, but what you're already doing with Imaging 3.0 is to think of this. How can you get there with a smart car, with a scooter, to do the other things? I'm just giving you an image that you're welcome to use since I'm going to add your Imaging 3.0 to my slides. Give me a call and I'll send you this one if you want it. Because that's really what we've got to do, is figure that out. I don't want you to think that I'm a great artist. This is what I saw one day when I was running in Lincoln Park getting ready for a race. If somebody actually gets it at the $38 a night Diversity Marina right by where I live, is we've got to be thinking of the less expensive way to do it. And your president last year did this. I apologize to this year's president. I didn't have the benefit of the print copy from the Journal of ACR. But last year's president said, and I found this very eloquent, it's really my closing content slide, his topic is things changing. And he said, my motivation for discussing this change yet again is that recent healthcare legislation has moved patient and family-centered care from a theoretical discussion to a necessary component of the new value-based reimbursement activity. It has taken this legislative nudge to re-energize our attention. In the close future, and I think he and I are talking about the same time frames, radiologists must do more than perform safe procedures or give accurate reports. Radiologists, as members of patient care teams, will now have a personal investment in whether patients actually get better or not. Couldn't and haven't said it better myself. So hats off to you as a professional organization for doing this. And one of my favorite paintings as a futurist who also, as I say, paints on the side is René Magritte's painting La Clairvoyance, looking into the future. It's for you to look at that egg in your states, in your local markets, in your professional association, and imagine what you can make fly. And you're already well down that road, perhaps more than any other professional association. But remember the slide with which I started. It's not going to be easy. It's all downhill from here on up. Thank you very much. I don't know if Tim is coming up to give me the hook or lead Q&A. And by the way, I think the idea of Q&A is a little arrogant. So make a discussion. Tell me what I'm missing. I try very hard to be humble. Remember, I'm an economist and a weatherman. So I have two strikes against me. And really welcome your views.
If you have questions, please approach the microphone, and we'll take them in order as people come.
Yeah. And again, alternative points of view. It doesn't...
microphone number 4.
Aaron Kahn, counselor from the state of Georgia, speaking for myself. First, I'd like to thank you for an excellent speech.
Thank you.
I'm going to guess that most of the people in this room were considering that over the time frame that overall medical spending has skyrocketed, the actual rates for individual studies has declined significantly. A great deal of the cost of that medical inflation, certainly the majority of it, is not necessarily coming from physician spending, but from other aspects of the healthcare system, such as large hospital charges, such as medical malpractice rates, such as sky-high rates on prescription medications. Yet, at the end of the day, we as physicians are going to have to play a role in bringing those costs back to earth. What can we as physicians do to help with the exorbitant non-physician spending that's breaking the healthcare bank?
Excellent question. What can you do? I'd say it's just keep doing what you have done, looking at clinical indicators and whether you're using the best test, whether the knowledge of the condition would even lead to changing the patient. There were a couple of, I didn't include them in my presentation, but there were a couple of excellent articles in the last 18 issues of the journal describing what you do with incidental and secondary findings and their impact on cost. So you can go to that level of detail. Work with the insurance companies to move toward bundling. I not usually in a position of advocating something, but in the case of bundling, I'm an out-and-out advocate. Excuse me, and that's the idea of getting paid for managing a patient and making sure that you're using the most cost-effective ways of doing that. And bundled payment does that, again, for all of the reasons that fee-for-service payment fails, again, nicely characterized by 4 or 5 speakers off this very stage yesterday afternoon. So I guess rather than me trying to go down a list of all of the things, it's really to mention that it's multi-pronged. If you would like a list of the very good list of all of the categories that have been covered in the literature. Institute for Healthcare Improvement actually has that. In fact, it's embedded in that article from JAMA that I used. So and you hit it. It's the administrative costs, it's the wasted tests, it's the repeated tests, it's the lost information, it's non-compliant patients. Something that really we haven't addressed much is how often the patients themselves fail to follow through on their end. And it can actually happen. And my internist and family practice friends are particularly eloquent on this. How often it happens that they just can't treat their patients as fast as the patients are killing themselves or refusing to be compliant and persistent with therapy. So it's a whole host of things. But I can't think of any of them that aren't included in your Imaging 3.0 and the subsequent literature I've seen. So go back to my last slide. It's all downhill from here on out. This is not easy. If you're asking the question for a simple solution, just keep chipping away. I'm coming to my favorite Henry Moore quote. Henry Moore is a famous British sculptor, and one of his paintings is over here in the Hirshhorn Garden. And when he unveiled it, he was actually asked by a journalist, Mr. Moore, how did you paint this? I mean, how did you sculpt this? What was it that motivated you to do this? And I forget what he called, I think it's a reclining nude woman or something like that. And his answer was absolutely fascinating. He said, well, I had the image of doing a sculpture of a reclining nude woman, and I went out and bought a hunk of granite and imagined a reclining nude woman in there, and then just chipped away everything that didn't look like her. And so I think that's just a small process, little bit by little bit. I guess, again, real quickly, I'll belie my 60s roots here. It's every year, in fact, it was just last week, every year I make sure I listen to Alice's Restaurant. How many of you remember Alice's Restaurant? And you can get anything you want, but you start with one person singing it, and then hopefully somebody else sitting next to you sings it, and then suddenly you got a quartet and then a chorus, and that's what it takes. This is little by little. There's nothing simple about it. Just keep doing good things and move in the right direction. And lead.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Okay, so the next few, microphone 3 will be next, 2, 2, 1, 2. So microphone 3.
Hi, my name's Seth Hardy, and like you're a recovering golfer, I'm a recovering engineer.
Okay.
I have kind of a two-part question. Neural networks are nothing more than computationally powerful linear regression. That you touched on earlier. And do you have any opinion about whether neural networks fit in more to your idea of prediction or forecasting? And what are some of the blind spots involved in this kind of technology?
Well, first of all, I'm the son and grandson of engineering professors, so is that child abuse? I don't know. But so I really grew up with this kind of discussion. In fact, my dad was at MIT for some time and was in Norbert Wiener's workshop on the original cybernetics stuff. So strangely enough, I have a little bit of that from dinner table conversation over the years. I do not pretend to be an expert, and it has certainly changed a lot. But I would hope that the neural network stuff is going to become forecasting and look at the realm of possibilities, if for no other reason than the randomness of the way in which things can go as they develop. A regressive, engineering focus kind of thing suggests that things always build one on the other in the same way they did in the past, and that's simply not the case anymore. So I'm going to transfer your question with some trepidation here to quantum physics and say that I'm much more a Niels Bohrian, on the Niels Bohr side of the impossibility principle, the uncertainty principle. That the more and more you know about less and less, you get to the point that you absolutely know everything about nothing. And so I like mystery. I like the possibility of being able to not answer questions like that, but still being fascinated by looking for them. So I'm giving you really sort of a poor answer because I'm covering up for the fact that I'm no expert in neural networks. But it's fascinating. I'm going to follow with great interest. In fact, I'm going to be asked to put on the mailing list for your new institute that was mentioned yesterday. I will follow that with great, and talk about it to other organizations as well, assuming that you would like to have that publicized and be recognized for the neat work you're doing. So sorry for a roundabout less than elegant
I
answer.
appreciate that.
But I'd say I would do whatever I could professionally to fight efforts to make neural networking studies precise. I like randomness.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Microphone number 2.
I'm Jian Lee from New York, just speaking for myself. I just want to say thank you for 3 things. 1, for really a fun, lively talk. 2, for the affirmation for our field. And 3, for teaching us how you get 30% chance of rain. We really did learn a lot today, so thank you.
Oh, my pleasure doing it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Microphone 2.
Know that. Douglas Mintz from New York, speaking for myself.
Could you lean into the microphone?
Yeah,
I'm having a difficult time hearing you.
I just want to posit that your diagnostic convergence, in a way, is being done, or another term for that is decision support.
Okay.
And the ACR does it by way of, in radiology and others, like some of my colleagues at Weill Cornell, are doing a global decision support wherein one can take information from the medical record and everything that's there already, and then guide the physician to order appropriate tests or not order appropriate tests, and that can be all built into a hospital system.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. The decision support makes great sense. And I'd love to hear more. You say it's at Cornell? Okay. I also heard Duke was doing some work along that line, so I will look into that. Thank you very much.
Microphone number 1.
Hi, Dave Posture from Chicago. I'm sorry for almost running you over in Lincoln Park last week.
What? Somebody almost did. Was it really? No, it was not you. It was not you. I met the guy that almost ran me over last week.
So in terms of the sort of combination of pathology, lab, radiology, so that concept came out many years ago. I know that SG2 had a diagnostic platform it was pushing as the probable wave of the future, and that was almost 10 years ago. And there's been very, very little progress. For those of us who work with pathology, trying to drag them into the digital era, it's very difficult. And what I see is that probably the best patient care that I see occurs in multidisciplinary conferences where all sorts of disparate information is synthesized with discussion and then decision-making among physicians. And I'm sort of curious as how some of these things can happen. You can have a certain amount of, you certainly can automate the information flow and a certain amount of automation in pathways and how you make decisions. But how do you, in a timely manner, have that degree of consensus and thoughtfulness in that sort of combined mode?
Well, I'm going to give you a weird answer. I have spent some time thinking about that. And I'm in favor of doing it in as small a groups as possible. In other words, I would rather see that done by an expert consortium. I'm just going to take a wild guess that you might have some tie to like a Northwestern or a Loyola or an Advocate. I mean, one of the organizations.
None of the 3.
Well, that's a wild guess, and that's fine. But I would rather see it done at that level on a multidisciplinary platform than done nationally. As much as I lament the cuts in the NIH budgets and participated in the April 22nd, marches for research and the like, I really hate to see these national efforts that get so bogged down in politics on accepting it. And climate change would be an excellent case in point. So my answer to your question would be to have faith in small, multidisciplinary local groups to do that, as opposed to make it larger and larger national organizations. Just a personal opinion. But not in any way to prevent it. I'm glad to hear that, I forget the name, SDQ was the company you said 10 years ago?
SG2.
SG2. Oh, SG2, Sachs Group, sure.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Grab me afterwards and I'll tell you the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey once said from Chicago. Yes, I was well aware of the Sachs Group. In fact, had a little collision with them over that point. Thank you. I want to strongly encourage it, but allow it to happen at an organic local level with encouragement from a national association such as ACR. But I just shudder when I start seeing larger and larger national scale efforts to solve problems. I'm really hard-nosed on the no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to my general comments on health reform. I mean, even if there were a political group in charge right now whose ideas I liked, I am so against trying to do it at the national level that I would be pushing to let's do it at state level and see what we can do, sort of pitting Illinois against Indiana and see if we come up with two different solutions. Just a personal opinion.
That's unfair.
Well,
all right.
It's going to be Illinois versus DePaul in basketball any day now. So, okay. See, things change.
Microphone number 2, then 434.
Lubbock Thomas, counselor from New Mexico, speaking for myself. You mentioned about paralysis in healthcare reform at the federal level, citing Republicans versus Democrats, as well as Democrats against Democrats and Republicans against Republicans, and implying that there's an opportunity for significant change at the state and local level. And I agree with that. However, federal law trumps state law, and there are a lot of CMS mandates, Part D of the drug prescription benefit, that states can't overcome. Any suggestions on how to work around that at the state and local level?
Regrettably, no suggestions. Actually, I shouldn't take that. I have on occasion said, yes, civil disobedience. and I do mean it, as a matter of fact. The state that's willing to challenge the government and do things as long as they're totally defensible. In other words, it's going to pass all of, you're not being civilly disobedient and intentionally violating a federal law just for the sake of thumbing one's nose at feds you don't like, but saying the federal regulations are so onerous that they get in our way and going out and trying it. And I think beginning with, and I'm not making this up, this has been a consistent view in the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times every Sunday, is recognizing how many people can no longer survive within the parameters of ambiguous regulations, forget the fact that they're regulations, and have to go off and do things on their own, and how many times the Obama administration and now the Trump administration is simply turning away and saying, all right, we won't prosecute. So it's a little odd for me to come to that as federal policy, but when I say civil disobedience, I think there would be a point for the right governors, state combinations to simply say, yeah, Medicare Part D doesn't allow this, it's in violation, but let's go for it because we will have the data to be accountable and show that it is good clinical practice. So I'd put that above, but again, I'm a 60s kid, so what would you expect? And I did inhale, I'm sorry.
Okay,
right,
thank you.
Microphone 4.
Hi, Andy Moriarty. Thank you. It was an excellent talk, very exciting, very inspiring, and I know this is probably an impossible task, but as we have a futurist, a medical economist, could you give us your forecast on artificial intelligence and machine learning? We're very optimistic about it, but does it become something that we can't understand or fathom? Does it expand beyond what we as human beings can really appreciate or participate with?
Thank you for an excellent question, and one that I ask myself and ask others, and I truly don't have an answer. I am both in awe and in fear of what could come from artificial intelligence. Don't pretend to understand it. Already disqualified myself as not having the expertise of speakers that even stood up here yesterday. I'm gung-ho to actualize it wherever we can. I mean, I'm totally in favor of trying it, but I'm a little fearful of the unintended consequences.
Thank you.
Maybe even a lot fearful, and especially in the hands of governments and intelligence and getting at our individual freedoms. So I'm really up in the air. Thank you. Wish I could give you something hopeful. I mean, I am hopeful, but I'm scared. Does that make sense?
Thank you. We've got time for 2 more questions, so microphone 3.
Good morning. I'm Raymond Tu, counselor from Washington, D.C. Welcome to our city.
My pleasure.
I'm chair of the Medicaid network here for the American College of Radiology, and I'm glad you mentioned Medicaid.
Okay.
In an effort to balance the budget by 2027, to cut $800 billion in Medicaid and nearly $200 billion in the food stamp program is atrocious. And I would like for you to, number one, just say a few words about your position on how Medicaid should be emphasized in the various subspecialty societies. And number two, I would like to personally thank you for bringing it up in your lecture, because this is going to be an atrocity for those members of our society who don't have a voice. Thank you.
Oh, I completely agree. And I've always been a strong advocate of Medicaid, as a matter of fact, and had a lot to do with its policy development in Colorado, perfectly consistent with my view that states are where the interesting experiments can happen. And in fact, I'll go beyond my support for Medicaid. The budget that cuts the $800 billion over 10 years is pretty imprecise, is my understanding. But one of my favorite things is the federally qualified health centers, and which is very much tied to Medicaid. And I've spent a lot of time writing and defending them. And so if you can tell me where that happened, maybe I'll even be more uppity. But the good news, the silver lining I would see is even the most conservative state governors, with maybe 2 or 3 exceptions, are going to rail up against that one. So I take it as very sad, but not as totally predictive, if that makes any sense.
All right, Dr. Strax, final question at microphone 4.
Well, thank you, Tim. I won't introduce myself. In this room we have radiologists who are both diagnostic and therapeutic, so we treat as well as diagnose. I come back to your slide that's been mentioned, the 5-year forecast for Diagnostic Convergence Imaging 4.0, which I find fascinating. I think the increasing computer ability that we have, artificial intelligence, may make it possible to bring together many elements of diagnosis, as you say, creating a unified medical specialty of diagnostic science. I wonder if radiology loses its individual identity as a specialty within this new creation of diagnostic science, and if we might be able to lead that.
I will give you my quick response, which would absolutely be no more valid than yours and possibly less. But I would almost hope that radiology would lose its uniqueness in the process, because it would be moving things forward. And to have radiologists thinking, as I know they can so well, of this overall patient benefit from getting to the bottom and recognizing that the issue is not just CT versus MRI versus nuke, but or gee, do we need a 64 slice here? It's do we even need a test at all, and how do we sequence those tests and work together? And hats off, if I can get in one, I wanted to stand up and applaud to yesterday's speaker, who pointed out that we have twice the number of just units, imaging modalities as all these other countries, and attack that one. So it's not just radiologists defending all this excess supply, but getting the best bang for the buck. And so I don't personally. Gee, I hope I'm not going to suddenly destroy what was otherwise a good start here. But
you're doing okay.
I would love to see radiology become the leader of a new diagnostic science, without too much concern for whether it lost imaging, because there's a lot of imaging, quite frankly, that will not survive.
And I think that's important. I think that puts the patient more at the center, with less competition between all the others taking care of the patient.
Yeah, and I can say, in fact, I talk to other professionals, so you do too. You belong to many. So again, I'm no better than any of you here. But you really are the leader. You in imaging, ACR, are leading in the way of asking these questions and getting involved on the patient's behalf. But the net result is going to be a major change in your underlying practices too. But I'm excited by it.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bauer. I have a plaque that I'd like to present to you, and let me read it to the audience. In appreciation of his significant contribution to the ACR 2017 meeting, with a presentation of the Robert D. Moreton, MD Lecture, Forecasting Futures of Radiology at the Crossroads. It's all downhill from here on up. May 23rd, 2017, Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, I'm sincere thanks. I can honestly tell you I get a lot of these and have a box for them in the closet. This one goes on the wall. And since I'm moving up I'm going to live very close to Tim very shortly, you'll see it on the wall when I have you down for a glass of wine.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Sure.